Good afternoon and welcome to Living in the Promised Land. I'm your host, Mark Schmorley, and today I was going to go over a couple of news items that concern Alligator Alcatraz. As you know, we've been following the last couple of weeks, and there is some favorable court news, but again, like everything, it's on appeal. We'll talk a little bit about Kilmer Abrego Garcia's situation. We'll talk about, today we're going to talk about the immigration courts, judges, Alligator Alcatraz, and with us is Judge Denise Slavin, a 30-year judge in Miami and later in Baltimore, and a former attorney for ICE. So she has been on each side, and now is a senior advisor to the Americans for Immigrant Justice, and is quite involved with the lawsuit regarding access to counsel at Alligator Alcatraz. Denise, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
And so tell us what happened this week in the lawsuit.
So for the lawsuit that we're involved in, which is CM versus Nome, is the case that involved access to attorneys' access to the court due process. So we basically had sort of two wins in this case. One is after Alligator Alcatraz was open about 3 weeks and we filed the lawsuit, just by filing the lawsuit, lawyers suddenly started getting access. We're able to actually talk to people there. And then right before our meeting with the federal court judge, they designated Chrome as the place that would accept filings for bond from people at Alligator Alcatraz, which again, before that, we tried to file things and they would get rejected. So that the judge has dismissed that count of the complaint, but as I said, it's because we got what we wanted. We were able to get a place to file bond hearings for people who are at Alligator Alcatraz. The rest of the counts have to do with access to counsel and various different issues in that. And that case has been transferred now to the Middle District of Florida, just on jurisdictional venue issues.
So normally, when somebody is detained, they are either detained because they've had an order of removal and they're detained as they wait removal. They have a former one. Maybe they didn't show up for court. Maybe they just had an order of removal before, and they were just never removed from the United States. So they can do that. And also if ICE decides that believes that they are out of status, they have evidence to show that, they will draw up what's called a notice to appear, which is a charging document that goes to that is then lodged with an immigration court, and that's a normative way that things are done. So how were people brought to Alligator Alcatraz if there wasn't a court involved, and what was different about it?
What's different about it? I mean, Florida is one of the biggest jurisdictions in the United States to be in compliance with the 287G agreements. And those are agreements where the federal government delegates their immigration enforcement authorities to local police. Every county in Florida has signed one of those agreements, and some of the municipalities. So a lot of people going to Alligator Alcatraz are going there as a result of being stopped on the highway, being picked up in a car. One of the cases that was there was a 15-year-old boy who was a passenger in a car of someone who was driving without a license. And they put him there. The other thing is also under expedited removal authority, which has been expanded recently to enforcement wise to people who can't prove they've been in the United States for 2 years. They are being given expedited orders by the Department of Homeland Security, and I think some of them might have been ending up there too. But there has been a hodgepodge. But I think the biggest thing that has resulted in detentions there is this state police picking up people and then sending them to Alligator Alcatraz.
Yeah, and we've talked about 287G agreements, and we talked about how they're problematic because immigrants who are victims of crime often will go to the police and turn around and be jailed, which is something that I know you saw many people who you probably granted asylum to who had that, who said, I couldn't go to the police if I was being threatened based on my religion, based on my who I was, based on my group, based on anything, you know, because the police would turn on me. And this is, you know, whether it's inadvertent or whether it's, intentional, this is what's happening. That's how I view these agreements, is you create a situation where the police are not there for the community. Um,
Well, and you highlighted another area that's changed recently under the Biden administration. If they picked up somebody, arrested somebody, or were considering putting them in detention, they had to ask them, "Have you been a victim of a crime? Are you a victim of domestic violence?" And then if it was potential that they might be eligible for relief of a U visa or relief under the Violence Against Women Act, then they would investigate whether they had filed an application or consider that in terms of whether they were going to pick them up and detain them at that point. They've flipped that in the current administration, and basically they say you don't have to ask that question anymore. And what we're seeing on the ground is, they basically said if someone claims it, and if that person can prove that they filed an application, so it puts the onus on them, not they don't have to call out USCIS to verify it, then you can talk to somebody about whether it should be considered. But our actual experience has been, AI Justice had someone detained there who was a U visa applicant, and the talked to the ERO officer, and they said, "We don't care. We don't care if you got a U visa. They're going to get deported. They're going to get deported."
now, can you just tell the viewers what a U visa is?
Oh, a U visa, I'm sorry, is for a victim, someone who's been a victim of crime. So it was basically meant to encourage people to come forward and report crimes, because so much crime against the immigrant community goes unreported because they're afraid to come forward.
Yeah, and you see, yeah, and it's a victim of a violent crime, and you need to, report it. You need to assist. It encourages you to assist the police, and I think the important factor is that you know uh whether whether the police are your friend is an entirely different thing in the United States, depending on the communities. But certainly, many immigrant communities, like I was saying before, people are reluctant to report crime, and the authorities have never been on their side, and they have never been supported, and in fact, they've been persecuted or attacked, and in their country, and the police, if anything, might be corrupt, and they're and so there's that inherent fear from a lot of people that are here, and then to know that that if you go to the police, it can be used and they don't have to ask that. Um, because there is the view with all of these kinds of visas that you get for, being a victim of crime, being a battered spouse or child, are 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 just ignored, and it's part of the part of it is dehumanizing immigrants. And the other part is, just not, not viewing yeah, I mean, not viewing the crimes against them as important to prosecute. I see it to some extent. Um, so where are, okay, so they've gotten, Alligator Alcatraz, the people, that I was talking to this week, they were celebrating. I mean, my God, yeah, they're out there, and I mean, I can't imagine. People that I know were watching the episodes, they were saying, you can see how hot it is. I said, no, you can't even imagine what that's like in the middle of the day in August in South Central Florida in the Everglades there. The level of heat, the level of just physical toll. And it's not like, whatever they bring, they bring. It's not like there's a 7-Eleven on the next block. They're 20 miles from anywhere to really get any even water, things like that. And they were around the clock, and their witnessing was really helpful to to the environmental lawsuit. Um,
Yes.
so tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
What's
I'm less familiar with it, but the environmental lawsuit actually has been a big victory because the judge has basically expressed that they are doing irreparable damage to the habitat there under the National Environmental Protection Act. And so for that reason, she's enjoined any new entries there and asked them to start winding down, like disconnecting various things there. So it may result in the closure at the very least temporarily of Alligator Alcatraz. Um, Fingers crossed. The only concern with the lawsuit is there's things that they could do to reopen it under the NEPA, so that we're back at the, as long as they comply with the environmental concerns, which would put us back in the same thing. But um, it's a big win, and environmentally, um, hopefully the conditions would improve there too, because I don't, I think you've said you've been there. I've talked to people who've been there who've just seen water trucks coming in and out and
Oh, no, I wasn't there. We broadcast to there. I mean, I've
oh,
been
you
to that
brought,
area many times, but
uh,
not generally in the middle of the, if it's the middle of the day in August, you're not hiking. You're not spending a lot of time outside in the middle of the day in
no,
August.
attorneys who were going there trying to get in the first
Yeah.
couple of weeks before they were allowing people in were waiting all day, and the guards would tell them you should wait in your car because you're going to get eaten alive, and they did. The mosquitoes out there are just horrible. So people were either concerned about getting dehydrated or getting, um, you know, massive harm from mosquito bites if they didn't wait inside the air-conditioned car. And we had people waiting there for 4, 5, 9 hours trying to get into the camp to see
Which is
blue whales.
just, which is just, crazy because these are people with cases and these are people that might face pretty imminent removal. And so, yeah, that's just crazy. And also, I mean, the decision. I would say this, when I've got a close friend who is on the administrative leave, took the buyout from working on earth science at NASA. And so I said to my friend, you will love this decision more than I will because you'll understand it because the judge took so much of the evidence, the environmental evidence, the impact statements, and also the Miccosukee tribe. It's their sacred land, and you're bringing, and the people that were outside, they noticed lights coming in, and one of the guys that was there when we were interviewing last week, Wesley, is himself a construction worker. And he
Mhm.
said, hey, if I could get something up that quick with no permits, I mean, I would never be able to build something like that. Like it's already flooding. They know it's flooding. There's no running water. I mean,
The conditions there were outrageous. I mean, they're basically cages with tents over them, with, air conditioners that broke constantly. They did have a combined toilet and sink, which a lot of people were totally grossed out about because they weren't sure if the water was really being separated, and it constantly backed up. There was raw sewage on the floors there. So it was a nightmare. I mean, the food, people talked about having worms in the food there. So it was just, or half frozen, because that's the only way they could um, guarantee that it wouldn't get bugs in it. So the conditions there were just outrageous. And they had again, the lights on all day when they were there. People couldn't tell if it was day or night. They really weren't getting outside. If they were taken anywhere, ICE didn't have a physical presence there, and would only visit maybe like once or twice a week is what we heard. And when people were taken to see them, they were taken in complete arm and ankle shackles to see an ICE agent, to discuss their case. Um,
well,
so
and it became really confusing to the people there, and I think it became confusing to probably the people working there too, is who's in control. Because the state is saying, no, we run it. So therefore, we don't need the environmental rules, the federal environmental rules. It's up to the state of Florida. We run it. But then then when they said, how do you decide who's there and how do you decide how that, well, that's all ICE. And then
yeah,
there's the corporation that's running the prison. Yeah, I don't, I keep forgetting the name because it's not Geo. system. It's not Geo, it's another one, Gardenia or something. But
Mhm.
we'll put it in the notes. But so everybody's passing the buck to everybody else. But ultimately, the appeal of that lawsuit is the Governor DeSantis saying, no, no, we're appealing because it's not a federal facility, which I mean, it was literally christened by, Kristi Noem, Donald Trump, and DeSantis. So yeah, you could say it's definitely a partnership. And you have, yeah, I mean, you do have state, and you had, I mean, Maryland. I've talked about Maryland doesn't have detention anymore, and so anybody that we have that's picked up goes somewhere else. But when a county or a state in the country houses them, they will there's guidelines and ICE people will come on a sort of a scheduled basis, but this seems pretty ad hoc when they,
This this is horrible, and we're fearful that this is like sort of a trial balloon to see if they can do it in other states, basically. Um, but the big problem with it is these people, when I was an immigration judge, I used to hear about things that happened in third world countries, and I heard the term disappearance for the first time as an immigration judge. I didn't know what it was. This idea that someone could be walking down the street and be picked up and then not heard from for months or ever again, and no one knew their fate. Um, it's happening now in the United States, and it's happening especially because of places like Alligator Alcatraz, and that someone will go out to buy milk, get pulled over, and uh, for ostensibly some sort of driving check, maybe actually because they were driving while Hispanic, and then sent in, picked up and under a 287G authority, be taken to Alligator Alcatraz. And since it's not the federal system, they're not put in a locator system. No one knows where they are. Um, and again, we weren't getting access to the camp. No one was allowed in. So people were disappearing for like 3 weeks at a time or longer with none of their family having any idea of where they went to. And if someone on the street had seen them picked up, they didn't, the people weren't always wearing identification that whether it was ICE or, and in this case, they might not have been ICE, picking them up at the time. So it's disappearances have come to America, where someone can go out and then just disappear and then turn up maybe later. And we're on track for being one of the worst years for deaths in detention in a long time. There's been 14 deaths in detention. And again, that's recorded deaths. Alligator Alcatraz is not under the state DHS requirement to record any deaths there. So we have no idea if deaths have occurred there. Um, we have rumors that they have, but nothing that can verify it at this time. So it's just talk about disappearances for those people. You know, if there's people who have died there, they've truly disappeared, just like in a third world country.
right.
Um,
And I think one of the differences having been in Peru when that was happening, and especially around the neighborhood, is when somebody has disappeared, you will get people who will march, and people are used to it. They're accustomed. They'll march, and we saw that in Argentina in the 70s. When kids were disappeared, that they could the madres, the mothers would be there, and you know this is the thing in the United States. People are so used to reality TV, they don't know what's real or not. And people in countries where that happens understand it's real. Like they
mhm.
and this is real, and all of a sudden it's turned into what was, I mean, there were that certainly issues that we had, in the private bar that I had with uh ICE detention and conditions and access and things like that before. It was very uneven because when you have states, it's very uneven. But what we're seeing now is this new level. And I mean, I happen to be around, and there's a ICE app, which is ICE's, I guess I call them, they're sort of like customer service. I mean, that's when people report, they go to ISAP, which is the nice office, and they actually have postcards on a map of the US. Thank you for visiting us. Comply. So the idea with ISAP is if somebody is caught at the border, then they report while they're in court, and there's nothing, it's generally just you report, it's a piece of paper, you sign it, you leave, and that's historically the way it's been. And so I went with somebody, they were going to give him a bracelet because he was late for his appointment. And I walked in and they didn't tell anybody anything. And I said, "Oh, there's the ankle bracelets. You guys sit here, I'll sit next to you." And the agent said, "Oh, no, no, you're not sitting down, counsel, and we're taking him in." And I said, "Oh," and we talked about it. And she said, I said, he's made it to all his court dates. Yeah, they fool you. That's what they do. Like talking to me as if, I was born, like in a way that was way different. Like you just stick aside. And then they walked out with him. I was waiting. They said, "Wait out here, we'll talk to you." And then the woman from ISAP said, "No, they got him. They're taking him from here." And geographically for folks is Silver Spring. It's about a half an hour from Baltimore. So I followed, and then I had to talk to the director of detention and removal, and that was the day before Memorial Day. So it was to have any humanity, and he called me back, and it was something there. At least they were detained fairly close, but this is happening, and people, yeah, they're going to come home, and dad's not there, mom's not there, and they don't know where they are. And what is this? What is the locator that you're talking about?
It's a system that you could go online and enter someone's name, especially a number, date of birth, and they'll tell you if they have a match and if there's someone, and they give you a code for where that person is if they have it. But if you go in for someone and someone that person's in Alligator Alcatraz, it just will give you a zero. It says no results.
Well, and a number, it's funny because you say that. I've never, it's actually you can use that, but it's really an a number is something that for folks out is something that like you don't get it if you're a tourist, you don't even get it if you're a student, you get it if you are in an immigration court, you've been, ICE has detained you, you've been arrested by ICE in any way, or you are applying for a green card, or there's, you can get, and they give you a number that you can be tracked by, but um I was we were talking before. I was I'll never forget, like I got a call from somebody who was just really freaked out that their niece had crossed the border with a cousin, and they didn't know where they were, and you know they didn't know if they were trafficked, they didn't know if they were dead, they didn't know where they were, and we typed it in and there it was. They were in a jail in, I think it was Pearsall, Texas, and they were findable just by putting their name in. And it was actually it's a pretty uh good thing in that sense, as you can find them. But um like how does Alligator Alcatraz not get on there? Like how do they not have to report that?
Well, first of all, we've been saying Alligator Alcatraz. Let me just say that that is like the most abhorrent word to be calling this.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first heard this, I thought that it was the left trying to shame the right-wing government doing this, or
Oh, I thought the opposite. I
oh,
thought there was just them because they had the cartoon with that
well,
they had the
but you're
meme.
and you're right, the attitude that that you encountered initially, but the attitude that it's okay to compare this to a prison that was renowned for its abusive, horrible conditions. And, the alligator part is just like sort of racist tropes in South Florida about calling people of color alligator bait. So it's just like it's outrageous to be using this name. But because, you asked about the locator system, because it is not a ICE detention facility is what there was. And it wasn't until the first lawsuit was filed and even our lawsuit that they started to say that they have taken the legal position that it's a state-run 287G facility. Now they're challenging the authority for them to run such a facility under those agreements. Um, but because it's not a state-run facility, that means that when you go into that locator, there's no results because they're not recording those people in that locator. And ICE is claiming not to know where there are, although clearly there's cooperation going on between ICE and the state on these things. Because you cannot be deporting someone to another country without a deportation order, without knowing it's there. So they have to be checking that. Or you can't be transferring them to another facility later, which is what they're doing. People leave um, Alligator Alcatraz, or the Everglades detention facility, by either being directly deported to another country or being sent to Texas or a facility that's going to then do like El Paso, and then they're deported from El Paso, or they get sent to other, if they do have a pending immigration case, they usually get sent to other facilities in Florida or other parts of the country too.
So you were a judge from 95 until 2019, and then you came back. You made it most of the way through the Trump administration, then you came
Yeah.
back and you were there for like you were there within the last couple of years. So what would it have been like if you stayed? How would your as a judge, like just
As a judge, all my friends have told me, well, all my friends have said, you got out at the right time, and it just my experience is, a lot of judges are leaving at this point because it is so horrible there. I mean, it's not a court in the traditional sense of the court. It's a court that's being run by the executive office. So it's a court that's being run by a law enforcement agency. And this is, I brought this out because I wanted to specifically quote it. There is a memo that this administration put out to its own judges. This was issued by the um, uh, Cersei Owen, the director, basically saying that there are some judges who appear to believe, based on their own personal policy preferences, that exhibiting bias is justifiable in certain situations as long as that bias is in favor of the alien against the Department of Homeland Security. And it goes on to say judges who would prefer to be policy advocates favoring other aliens or DHS should consider transitioning to other career paths. And although many judges carry out their important responsibilities in the professional and ethical matters, those who do not, by demonstrating bias and hostility towards either party, may be subject to corrective or disciplinary action. Now, there's no support in this memo whatsoever for what these alleged, I've never heard of the administration accusing its own judges of being biased in such a way and issuing such a memo before. So the clear message of that memo and the firing of 100 judges under the Trump administration is, you have to do what the Trump administration says. Um,
so the ones that are left, well, so just so we go back in the structure, because people wonder, like, well, people think, I mean, I know, I when I worked at the Organization of American States, which ironically, one of the things I worked on, I was an ESL director there, but I also went to law school when I was working there. And so I interned at the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights and worked on their prison report in the Americas. And so these conditions seem quite similar. But in uh, but one of the uh, one of the aspects is that people just don't know, like, what is an immigration court? And so I didn't know, like, what is an administrative law judge? Oh, it's less than so you were always an administrative law judge. You weren't approved by
yes.
Congress. So just how does the system work?
So it's a system that is problematic and has been problematic for as long as I can remember. But this administration has displayed how the system is so subject to abuse. We think, there's the first three articles of our Constitution. Article 1 is the legislature. Article 2 is the executive, the president's authority, and Article 3 is the courts, the judicial authority, the three checks and balances of our system to make it work perfectly. The bizarre thing is the judges are under Article 2, under the executive. They're under the control of the president's office. And while the statute says they're to be independent, and that's frequently cited, um, just being in a law enforcement agency makes it impossible for that to be seen, either perceived by the public that way or in fact happen. And this administration has made it worse in terms of, if it's as you went to criminal court and the court's docket was being controlled by the prosecutor's office. The prosecution decided which cases got to go first and how fast they had to go and what was going on. I mean, that's not efficient for the court system, which is one of the reasons that the court system has blown up so much, um, and is, and I think that some people would like it to implode. Um, but it's also just not it's got an inherent bias in it, in the system towards the government. Um, and so we, for a long time, I was either president or vice president of the National Association of Immigration Judges, which has been deunionized under this administration. Um, but we were always arguing to make us an Article 1 court, and that was to make us a separate court under the legislature, that the legislature would create a court that said this is the immigration court. And the models for that are like the bankruptcy court and the tax court, or all courts like that. They're not under Article 2, 3, they're Article 1. And they're separate. So they get a separate budget, they get a separate mission statement. They're not part of a law enforcement agency. They don't have the same boss as the prosecution does, and which is inherently bad. The other thing that's gone on is just an erosion of discretion of immigration judges over the past 25 years. And more. I mean, we've been talking about bond. When I first became a judge, the main way you got bond was you had to prove, which is the most way for criminal bond, that you're not a threat or danger to the community, and then you're not a risk of flight. You're going to keep coming back to court. So those were the two big things, and that used to be the two big things. Then something called mandatory detention came along, that said that if you had certain particular crimes, that you couldn't be released. Mandatory detention has been expanded and expanded and expanded, and now they're trying to redefine. The prosecutor's office is trying to reinterpret bond so that basically the only people who could get bond were people who were first inspected and admitted to the United States at one point and have no criminal record whatsoever. I mean, other than that, and it just doesn't make any sense, because people who entered here or are present here without being inspected still have valid applications. You under international law, if you come here to seek asylum, you should have the right to seek asylum in this country and not be subject to detention. That's one of the basic parts of the convention, the refugee convention that we signed on to, was not detaining refugees. And yet we're doing it. And we're doing it more and more. When I started as a judge, if you had an asylum application pending, they would not detain people with asylum applications pending generally, unless there was something extraordinary happening. That's not the case now at all. And the conditions of detention, which again have worsened under this administration, tend to be coercive, and people would rather give up their right to seek asylum here and hope to go to another country, or hope to hide somewhere in their own country, and risk persecution rather than the day-to-day horrors that they face in detention. I mean, we're talking like lack of we talked about, sleeping on floors 24/7 in the light, cold, lack of adequate food, and lack of medication, lack of access to medical care. I mean, some people are choosing to leave because, otherwise they're probably going to die because they're not getting their medication. And who can blame them? Plus, the whole mentality is this whole self-deport. One report showed this. Chrome has a particular section, one of the detention facilities in Florida, that is for people who are mentally handicapped, severely mentally handicapped.
Hmm.
And I was there, and even in this day, like from all over the country, they actually have psychiatrists there that they have at Chrome. And so from all of the East Coast, they would transfer people down to Chrome to get into that psychiatric unit at Chrome. Well, they were hanging up posters in the psychiatric unit explaining how they can self-deport. How can you do that? These people are not competent by definition to make that decision. And yet you're hanging up a poster saying, oh, go ahead, leave. All these great things are going to happen. And the posters, as you know, are incredibly misleading about
Yes.
it's easier for you to come back to the United States if you self-deport.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I had somebody like that who, he could, what the judge felt he wasn't eligible for bond, and he didn't want to stay, and he could, he had a strong asylum case, but not, you know, by weighing whether you want to sit in this detention center, or you can, hide or risk or do something at home, you know, so, it's not a straight up giving
Mhm.
somebody that option is, you know, the anguish of knowing your family is suffering because you can't work to support them. And this person had an asylum application in court, so he wasn't, I mean, the whole concept of like working, whether you have a permit or not, doesn't, in a sense, okay, that's a value, whatever people want to, but these are people that actually have work permits because they had an application, they could have one. And so he lost the chance to work, and they just decided we're going to go back. And so I get one of those, letters from the ICE counsel where they said, okay, if he wants to, we'll let him leave voluntarily. And it's not a legal what was called voluntary departure where you don't have because there was a removal order. It doesn't erase that, but they say, well, you can leave voluntarily and you and your family can get free plane tickets. And it's like, no, they're going to put him on a plane. I mean, you hear different things about it, but they do these
Yeah.
offers, and we're going to give, it's too good to be true. And so it's no, it really is coercing them and playing with them. And I think, you made the point, that you know, this administration has taken what are these really horrible laws, and we talk about that here a lot, is that what's got to change this time around is the response. And the response in our country, there's two parties, and we know what's taken over the Republican Party. There is no opposition. There used to be a sort of chamber of commerce. There used to be a certain kind of pro-immigrant view in the Republican Party, certainly the anti-communist countries. And I mean, there was that delineation. This is the first time where you've actually have white supremacists, where you'd say, I don't care if you're a Cuban, a Venezuelan. These are people who send Afghani, people who worked with the U.S. military. I mean, you have military veterans sitting there, escorting, Afghan, applicants to court so they're not picked up. There's just nothing. And uh, the response, I mean, it's the adopting of it's the adopting of immigration as a quote problem, as an issue that needs to be solved, that led to this horrible law that changed the expedited removal. We talked about these other things that came around in 96, and it was really everybody agreed with it. And even in the election season last year, the way it was discussed was, well, we're going to be tougher than them and we're going to just be more reasonable. But there was nobody saying, look, this is our reality. This is what this is what, um, is going on. This is what happens when the police cooperate, because nationally, these kinds of things weren't pushed. And I think this is one of the things that I think people are realizing, because they realize when,
Yeah. I have to say, like when I was at Chrome, usually like hearing bond hearings, usually frequently people would come in and say, "Oh, Your Honor, this is not a guy you don't want to give a bond. This is not a guy you want to deport. He's a nice guy. He's my landscaper. He has a picture of American flag on the truck. He's great. Or he's my kid's soccer coach. Or he's in our Bible study. This is not the guy." And it's like, yeah, but we have to look at the law and what the law says. It can be difficult. I'm talking about bond or regular hearings. I mean, judges very rarely have very few applications have complete discretion to either grant or deny. They have to look at certain eligibility criteria for it. But I think it's gotten worse now. It's impacting us more. And I just feel, and I don't just feel that like my concern, I'm semi-retired at this point, getting some retirement money,
refusing to retire.
refusing to retire. But the Social Security system is is going to collapse sooner without people. A lot of the Social Security system, people who are here without undocumented, pay into our Social Security system, and that money went to Social Security and it was ours and we kept it. And it doesn't go back to them. They can't claim that money or get it back or anything. And we were dependent on that money. I think it was in the neighborhood of a couple $1 billion or something that was going in from that population. What has changed in terms of our economy too, in terms of you see the supply issues, you see at a hotel, when you check into a hotel now, it used to be every day someone, they had enough people working there that's every day someone cleans your room. That's not going on anymore. They can't get people to do that work anymore. So we're just starting to see what life would be without an immigrant community. And it's unhealthy for all of us, is my concern in the long run. Just as someone who lives here. Um, I don't want to see a country with forced disappearances. I don't want to see a country with no food on the shelves, and I don't want to see a country with, with no workers to do caretaker jobs or, the low-paying jobs that U.S. citizens don't want to do.
And I don't think of you as Florida because like, for being in Baltimore and being a judge and being active in the association and teaching and all of those things. And but I end up like with all of these attachments to Florida, and people have known when I've had other guests that Florida hasn't always been this way. And I say, Florida was the place that formed my dad. It provided the shelter when my grandparents were like left Europe. My grandmother's family was, her older brothers were killed in the Holocaust, and she never wanted to leave Miami Beach. My dad, lived, moved back there from being in the cold north, and there's an attachment to Florida, and that I have when I went to college there, and it really formed me being in Gainesville. It's an amazing place, and it wasn't always like this. And people, it actually was a place where you have I mean, you voted there, the ballot's like 20 pages. You vote for there's the history of like open government and concerned citizens for places like the Everglades, and I people accuse me of finding these Republicans I like, and I don't on a lot of things. But Jeb Bush, when he ran for governor, had, many people won Florida, and there was flags everywhere. Like the idea that Florida was going to be a place where um immigrant communities and environment were attacked was just not a thing. And I mean, it was where going to University of Florida was where I never met people from countries like Suriname and Guyana, and I'm from Massachusetts. I didn't, I didn't know people from these places, and it was like, wow, and people from all over the place. And it's just and you're there. I mean, is do you feel anything in the air of Florida? Anything that could be, do you feel a change? Do you feel
Um, I don't, well, South Florida is different than North Florida. That's a big thing. So, I mean, and I loved it when I lived at Coral Gables at one point. Like, in my block, everybody was good neighbors, and there was only literally one adult in my block that was born in the United States, other than me. But it was nice. It was nice to have people from all different countries and backgrounds and cultures, mingling together. So it can be, and in Miami, there's still a lot of that, and it's still a lot of, cross-cultural things, and people, relish the cultures that they bring to this country. And North Florida is a little bit more conservative, but I don't know. I I feel like now, maybe I'm too optimistic, but I feel like now a lot of people are getting more and more, seeing more and more the impact that the negative impact that this mass immigration uh, arrests and deportations are having. Um, I hope that's true. I mean, I know in my little community, it seems to be true as people are very upset and concerned about it. Um, and some of the polls you see on television seem to suggest that too. I hope so because, and again, I'm hearing more and more like, um, and part of it's the agency I work in though too, but more and more people coming and saying, well, this is a good guy. This is not a bad hombre. This is a good guy. This isn't a good woman, and this shouldn't be happening to them. And and as you said, it's really disheartening when people who the law was designed to protect, like, we had a a, a, a woman who was application for relief under the Violence Against Women Act, who was detained. And by the time we could get her a bond, she was not very, she was represented by our agency, who only represents people who can't afford a lawyer. She didn't have the money for the bond, and she didn't want to wait for us to try to, apply for a grant or something to raise it. She was just wanted to go back to her country at that point. Um, and it was just really sad to, it's sad to see people being coerced into that situation here.
And and immigration bonds aren't like regular bonds where you can get your pay 10% somewhere. You've got to put a house up. You've got to put something. So it favors the people that are more established. And people do come up with it, but it's you know, yeah, I think the I mean it you always say, are people overstepping? I mean, to me, I just don't know. I see the reactions of people here, and I see like the interest that people have. I see the media, like, I don't listen to a lot of mainstream, but you turn on the news and it's sort of like the ice in DC. It's not considered, it's not reported on favorably. I can say this, I don't think there are very many people that other than an I told you so and look at him, he can do it and he's tough. I'm not sure there's a lot of people that are like, wow, I can go out into now I feel safe going to downtown DC.
Hmm.
It's not that, or I feel safe in walking around Tampa, or I feel safe. I mean, I don't think that's what's going on. I think I think it's scary for people, um and I think it's disillusionment, and I think that that's what's going on. But I think I see people responding. I mean, my cousin who works at he's a blackjack dealer at the biggest casino, I think on the East Coast, in Maryland Live in near Baltimore, and he said to me a few weeks ago, "What is this thing? Something about Nepal?" And I said, well, I never talk things like that with him. I said, well, why did you ask me about that one, Jeff? And he goes, well, because we got all these dealers, like a bunch of them, they're all Nepal. They're all from Nepal, and they're worried about something. Well, it was the temporary protected status, which they got rid of. So here you are, Maryland Live Casino, not exactly a bastion of the left. And people are affected. Or, I once debated FAIR, the Federation of American Immigration Reform. And it's funny because they had invited Judge Gossard, thinking because he was teaching, so they thought he was like a professor, but he was actually a sitting judge. And if you were a sitting judge, you couldn't be here today, and you're very restrictive about what you could talk
Yes.
about. But and so they made the mistake. So they said, okay, do I want to do it? And so I did, and I said, and I do believe this. I said to the person from there, I said, look, you're in a think tank. You have your ideas. It's great to have this hermetically sealed, ideas. But I said, I got somebody who runs a landscaping company, and his main person that he chose to be like his main manager and partner is a Mexican guy who he, got him his green card. This was when you could still, when the law was a little looser at the, last century, um, on that. And he got him his green card. I said, if you want to tell that guy that you know better, that how he should run his business, and leave your air conditioned office and do that, go ahead. But this isn't what's really going on out there. Nobody's going to a work site doing that. And I'm reminded, when I was in New Orleans a few years ago, there's this monument to the immigrants that rebuilt New Orleans after the flood. And when they were, people forget. I mean, it's so funny how we forget things about how they happen. And during the Biden administration, what were they doing is they were sending from Florida, from Texas, they were busing, I think Mississippi maybe too, but definitely Texas and Florida. They were busing people who would cross the border, or in Florida, who would come to Florida, and they were busing them up to DC. And so they
Hmm.
would show up at Union Station, and some of us would greet them, and they were busing them to New York. And I was working with our mutual aid folks here, and to help, acclimatize people to the area and help them. And you know, every one of them was running out to do work, and like they were here for that. It's sort of like, okay, you want them gone. And actually that was the one thing I remember, to like people that are less desirable now, but started out okay on this one, was Eric Adams said, when they first sent him to New York, he said, okay, if you don't want them, we welcome them. This is what makes New York great. It's like, as if inherently people that cross the border are bad, as if this is an inherent danger. And it's sold, but once the reality hits, I think people don't go for it. So what's next? What is next for you, and what is next for this lawsuit?
For the lawsuit. Well, I mean, there's still three active lawsuits with respect to Alligator Alcatraz. So we'll see what happens with them. They're all in pretty early stages. Well, the farthest one is still, that's just a temporary restraining order, I think, that she issued. So it's still in preliminary stages, and I think there's already an appeal filed on that. Um, yeah, I'm pretty sure there's already an appeal filed on the 11th Circuit on that order. So it's going to be a long ride with respect to those lawsuits in particular. I think one thing that American for Immigrant Justice is doing is um, also going to the international community. You talked about the Organization of American States and the United Nations. We have been bringing to their attention through various reports some of the abuses that we're seeing in detention at this point, and some of our concerns about disappearances. I mean, both of those organizations are very concerned about that. Um, so we're bringing it to their attention. I mean, there have been some hearings held, thematic hearings, by the Organization of American States. So we'll see what develops with that. I mean, at least it brings to light some of the concerns and the real conditions that are happening in the detention facilities. Um, and it's just it just floors me, because no matter most of these immigrants that are being held in detention facilities have not committed crimes. And even those that have committed crimes, it's like driving without a license and things like that. It's very few. The percentage is lower for violent crimes, and to hold them in the types of facilities that we're holding them in, um, the Everglades facility being the absolute worst. In terms of just makeshift, and one good storm. You know how South Florida is. One good storm could wipe that place out. And
Well, I had
to
heard there was 4 inches of water, so they were reporting in
when they opened, yeah, because they had a storm
well,
there.
I heard that this week. There was a
Yeah.
rainstorm this week, and people are out there, and it was funny because I think they were sort of disillusioned because when it's the border, they were sort of disillusioned because they thought this was a victory, and it's like, no, it's appealed. But I know they've cut down the amount of the inmates by like 2/3,
Mhm.
because they don't have the capacity. It's like, this is there's no plumbing.
Mhm.
I mean, that speaks volumes right there.
Well, but
There's no
even,
wastewater.
at Chrome, Chrome is, has gone up to double or triple its capacity from time to time, and it's way
Oh.
above capacity even now still. And they have tents, out at Chrome to help house the people there. So it is I don't, if a bad storm hits Florida at this point, it's going to take a very heavy human toll between Chrome and the Everglades facility. And I don't know, I don't know what their plan is, if they're planning on just sticking people in buses and driving up north like crazy, hoping to avoid the storm, because they can't, neither of those, the tent structures in Chrome and the Alligator Alcatraz tents over chain link fences are not designed to just to um, survive a tropical storm. Um, it can get wiped out pretty easily. So,
Yeah, I mean, I heard if I mean, Hurricane Andrew knocked out like half of Homestead Military Base.
Oh, yeah.
And those are sturdy, those are sturdy. So the hurricanes, they're no joke, as you know. And so
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
they're no joke. And even though it's inland a bit, the level of flooding, and it's not that far inland. And so it's
No, but it's swamp. It's gonna the water level is just gonna rise there, when any storm that has any amount of rain in it is gonna overwhelm the sewage system um, very easily. And the health risk that creates for the people who work there, in addition to the
right,
people who are there,
right.
is just outrageous.
Yeah,
Um,
no, it's yeah, and yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of issues with that too. So, well, listen, thank you so much for coming on. I think the more people know, I think it's a lot to digest. It's all happening at once. But it's great to see, it's great to see people out. It's great to see the lawsuits. I be optimistic. I do think that they pretty much are losing at every angle, but as you know, a court can do something, but what really makes a difference is people there. What really makes a difference is people like filming, in your own neighborhoods. If you see people picked up, especially if you're of the privilege of being a U.S. citizen, you can confront. What are you doing? You can see, show them your badge. What are you doing? Like you can be there if they're doing, and you can, there's all kinds of ways that people can know where ICE is. People can, you can announce. I mean, if people aren't, or if ICE is roaming a neighborhood, you can be there and you can advise people, through organizations in your area.
yeah,
They don't have to speak to them. I mean, because part of the problem is people, people are gonna talk, or they're nervous, and some ICE agent comes up and says, are you illegal? Or you, and people are, yeah, I'm not, because people think if I say no, he must know something, or
yeah.
she must know
There
something.
there are rapid response networks all over the country now where that are posting phone numbers that you can call in if you see an ICE action, just to report it, so people can go out and observe and make sure that find out where the people are taken so they don't disappear. And so they know their rights when they're taken. That's the goal of these organizations. And there are court observer situations. I've never been so proud as of my nephew. I was on, for some reason on Facebook, I clicked on, and he had been a court observer, and he was taking pictures of people being arrested in immigration court. And I was like, yes, you
Which court was that?
know.
Which court was that?
I don't, he's in Virginia, but I'm not sure which court it
Oh,
was.
I probably Sterling. There's four courts here, and
Uh-huh.
the ones I don't think Baltimore, they're doing that yet. They're arresting them as much in the court, and certainly not Hyattsville yet. But in
Mhm.
Virginia and Sterling and Annandale, they are. And
Mhm.
yeah, and so people, I mean, it's horrific. I mean, how would you? It would be like if you were on the bench and you hear people being arrested and thrown to the ground, and you hear that outside of your courtroom. You're thinking, oh my God, this isn't safe. And it's great because yeah, you can go in. People can observe immigration courts. People can, and the more people do that and know their rights to do it, the less they can tell you they can't.
Mhm.
I mean, there are some hearings that are closed, but for the most part, people are able to walk in and sit in an immigration court, right?
Yeah. And a lot of organizations are giving like little mini courses or training for people about how to do court observation to be safe for yourself. But yes, it does make a big difference. Someone, filmed some of the detention conditions at Chrome and that and sent it out, and um, somebody put it on a podcast like this, and it really helped bring to light some of the information about what's going on in these places. So yeah, the more so many arrests that you see, and luckily people caught things by film that somebody couldn't claim that they were resisting arrest, or resisting an officer, or that they had claimed that they had a warrant when they hadn't, or something. So um,
Well,
it
and that's what happened last time. And people, again, we forget, but last time really it was less broad, but in some ways more cruel because they treated children horribly and separated
yes,
families. And so
yeah.
people were recording them being abusive to children. I mean, to say this, but this is the truth. When you see ICE agents throwing a woman to the ground, or you see the arrests, and that's not even getting, we've done a couple of shows on the Rumisa Ozturk, and but the fact that all those got into the media, it's really what's gotten the media talking about it because they know this isn't right. They know something's wrong here, and and I think it's pretty universal that really only really far out there people believe that this is required for their safety. I think there are people that it there's other strains of the United States history and either the DNA of the United States that this harkens to. But just like after, the Civil War when they beat down Reconstruction by, bombing black churches and intimidating people that way, it wasn't out of fear. And just like, you know, genociding American Indians, the same thing. And these things that have happened in the past are done for, othering, intimidation, white supremacy. And that's always had the strain. And I think it's not, it gets people, people aren't formed, we're consumeristic, we kind of sit back and assume things will be fine and whoever's there, I was always raised, the president's the president. It's not that, radically different, and you just respect the president and you wait till your next election. And we know this is different on lots of grounds, and immigration, it's funny because here we are, and we thought, okay, we have our little club, and I'm in the private bar, you've been in government, you've been in the I side, well, the INS side then, and then in the court, but we all kind of worked together and did education together, and we kind of had this same, because who else knew these laws and esoteric? And now, it's very strange because it's the consistent headline that everybody's talking about. And sometimes I'm like, okay, well, we can, where do you want to start? But, to talk about it, but, how do you send people to third countries? Well, that really wasn't, I mean, was that something that you really saw much before? If you gave withholding of removal, you didn't.
No, and I think most judges feel really bad because frequently withholding of removal was if cases settled in immigration, sometimes somebody would say, the department would say, well, we could agree to withholding of removal, but we can't agree to asylum. And the person would say, okay, I'll be safe. I'll be here. I'll take withholding of removal and not appeal the decision. And then who knew that it would come to this, that they would then have an active campaign to start deporting people to South Sudan or, South Sudan or Swaziland.
Eswatini, and yeah, and yeah, I mean, it wasn't, you had a work permit. The main thing was you couldn't apply for somebody in your family. You were protected. And I mean, I had a judge tell me, oh, because it's protection. And I said, okay, it's not. And then as we were briefing it later on was for that case out of Massachusetts. That's now, the case where they were sending people to third countries, and people didn't know it was happening, but and then they would get deported back to their own country. And that's where I wanted to talk a bit about, Kilmer Abrego Garcia, because that's what happened with him. Is when you were on the court, so it wasn't in your courtroom, it was with your colleagues, Judge Kessler, who they talk. I mean, it's so funny because they talk about the judges, but Judge Kessler at the beginning, found him to be, a gang member threat because the Prince George's County Police brought that to her, and it was sort of a prima facie case. But then when Judge Jones heard the case, he granted withholding of removal, and as and it's funny because it's like, oh, Judge Jones was is not the he didn't come out of the ACLU or the left. I mean, he's very fair, very good guy, but he was very conservative in a lot of ways. And he heard that case, and it was a real case. And he said, okay, well, you've applied too late, but you would be persecuted. It's more likely than not you would be persecuted. And they don't talk about that. And so they say, okay, you can't go back to your country because these other rules, you have to apply for asylum within a year. You have, and some other things that might not let you get it, but it's a form of protection. Um,
Mhm.
and the way that they're talking about it is it just means the whole world is open to be deported to that. And that was not a thing before.
That was never in people's wildest dreams a thing. And I mean, even, you know, 20 years ago, people who were from Cuba being detained would just take an order of removal because their attitude was like, I don't care because they're not deporting anybody to Cuba. Well, now they're deporting people to Cuba, and if they can't deport them to Cuba, they're deporting them to other countries. Um, so, that you've never been to before and you don't speak the language. Some of,
And that
I
might,
understand a lot of Cubans or some Cubans are going to Mexico. But I think there were two Cubans on the trip to South Sudan, and I don't know how. I mean, talk about a culture shock. I would think that would be very difficult to try um, to deal with. Yeah, there were things that were routine before, and withholding of removal just offered you protection. The attitude was it offered you protection as long as you didn't ever want to leave the United States or, you know, go back to your country. And people were like, no, they didn't want to leave, so they took withholding of removal, and then they were guaranteed there would be, they would at least have that. They'd have work authorization. They'd be able to live here. And now that's not the case anymore. If one of those people gets picked up, then they could be sent to the Everglades facility or a facility like that and find themselves in a third country.
yeah, yeah, and then there was in the last administration, the Supreme Court said, well, there needs to be a procedure. You can't just, you have to make sure that that country is going to accept them as a
Hmm.
refugee and resettle them, and not just, like in that case, or about with the gay man from, that's part of that case um, I know this part well because I had a Guatemalan case where they granted withholding, but and under the circumstances, I argued in this that didn't work. But somebody from Guatemala who was gay went through Mexico, came to the U.S. While they were in Mexico, they were raped, and they came to Texas, and they were in court. They were in court in Louisiana, and they were granted withholding. And within 3 days, they didn't release them. They drove them down, dropped them off in Monterrey, and Mexico said, "You can stay in jail. You can stay detained for 10 months and do your asylum case here." And where you can go back to Guatemala. So petrified of being detained in Mexico where they've been raped, they went back and they're in hiding in Guatemala. And that's the case that's now, that's the case that the Supreme Court would not put a stay. They could have stopped this during those hearings about sending someone to a third country without any process.
Hmm.
So even though as rare as it is, and it's just such a waste of time because what's the purpose? Somebody's going to be persecuted. They didn't get asylum. They have the penalty of not being able to ever travel out of the US. They have the penalty of not ever being able to get a green card and the case can be open. They'd have to, they still have this deportation order, which has its penalties, but instead they have to, push it that level further. And, these are the things, this is the 96 law was so massive and complex. And it's kind of funny. It's now is when people are really learning about it, this much later, and it was like you were like a baby new judge when it first came out and you were
Yeah.
applying it. And I started practicing in the wake of it. So a few years later. So it's funny because now is when the real ramifications are hitting and the things they're using. So we'll revisit it and we'll revisit this and keep us updated on what's going on. Thank you for the great work and just thank you for just staying in the fight and using all your experience and you can only go
Well,
up.
thank you. And thanks especially for talking about, I mean, we really do need to fix the immigration courts, no matter what administration is there, so that they are independent and make them more of an Article One court. And there are liberal judges, there are conservative judges. That's great. That's the way the system works, they should be a reflection of our society. Um, and it shouldn't be stacked by either political party. Um, so hopefully we can move to an Article One at some point. Maybe this administration has taught us the need for it.
Yep, yep. All right, well, thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, all right, take care. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.